In this lesson, we're going to talk about how we can use the daylight system as another method of simulating outdoor type illumination. Alright, so for this lesson I've gone ahead and removed the skylight and the direct light that we had in our earlier scene, and I've gone ahead and I'm going to leave these light tracer settings set to the same settings that we had in the previous lesson. So what I'm going to do is, with those settings still active, I'm going to add a daylight system. So those can be done in a couple of different ways. We can go to the Create panel, go over to Systems, and if we take a look inside the Standard pull-down menu, we should have an option for Daylight. We can also create this if we go to the Create menu, down to Lights, and we can create a daylight system from here. Alright, now when we try to add a daylight system, Max is going to ask us if we want to add some kind of a logarithmic exposure, just like what it asked us whenever we were adding the photometric lights. Just go ahead and click Yes. Now, whenever we click and drag outward, we're going to be presented first with a compass. Right? Now, this daylight system is actually based on real geographic measurements, so defining north, west, east, and south are going to be very important. So once we drag that out, then we can actually drag out the sunlight itself. Oops, let's go ahead and try that again. Let me just zoom back a little bit more. So we can drag out the compass. The size of this really doesn't matter. And same with the sunlight itself. It doesn't necessarily matter the distance from the scene. Just go ahead and click, and there we are. Now this has been added. Now one thing that is going to be a little bit different from this actual daylight system is the fact that it really doesn't necessarily work like a normal light, in that I really can't just grab this and then reposition this light any way that I choose. You'll notice even if I try to grab this light, nothing happens. So what we have to do is grab this light, go over to the Modify panel, and take a look at some of these different rollouts. Now if we take a look at some of these, let me go ahead and collapse this. By actually adjusting this, we can choose to either manually adjust the position, or we can use some kind of a date, time, and location, which is the default. You'll also notice that the sunlight and the skylight can be switched out. So right now we're using both a standard sun and a standard sky. But if you're going to be using something like mental ray, you could switch this out to use a mental ray sun, and you could also switch the sky out to use a mental ray sky, or we could use an IES sky profile, which we could actually download some kind of a light profile very similar to what we were doing with the photometric lights. We could do the same thing for the sun and the sky. Now for this example, we're just going to go ahead and leave it set to the standard sun and sky. So in the position, let's go ahead and alter the date, time, and location. So when we click Setup, it'll go ahead and bounce us over to the Motion panel, where we can now adjust the position of this sun. So we can actually now put in the actual time of day. So this is based on a 24-hour day. So try to find some kind of a light position where we get a little bit more light. We can also adjust the month, the day, the year, whatever the case may be. Now, if for whatever reason we still are not finding the light position that is correct for us, we can always just redefine which direction is north, west, east, and south. So all we need to do is grab this compass, rotate it, and now we can very quickly and easily change which direction is which. Right, so now we have this sun oriented in a little different way. Right, you can see the result that we have. So if we want to take a render of this very quickly, let's see what we have. Alright, and here's the result that we get. Now, looking at this, we have a couple of different issues. Number one, you can see that the lighting that we have is very, very harsh. We really can't see at all any of the soft shadows that we should be seeing with this daylight system. Now, number two, you can probably tell if you're following along on your own system that these renders are now taking a very, very long time. This render itself took almost 10 minutes, or actually over 10 minutes, just to render this. And the main culprit for that is these ray trace shadows, which is what this daylight system uses by default. So to speed things along, let's make sure that we're actually using a shadow map. So let's go back to the Modify panel, and let's take a look inside the shadow parameters. It's actually going to be up here at the very top. On the shadows, let's make sure that we are using shadow maps. That should help our renders move much faster. And for the shadow map parameters, let's go ahead and, in my case, I've got this set to about 2K map size, 2048. Alright, and I've got the sample range set to about 4 pixels. Now, if we want to make sure that this shadow map doesn't blur out unnecessarily, we can go ahead and use the overshoot feature. So let's take a look at the direction parameters. There we are. And we might want to make sure that we show the cone. And let's narrow this cone down to the area just where we need it. So that way we just get shadows in this area. And let's take a look at the render for this. There we go. And so now we're using these shadow maps. Now, the thing with this daylight system is that there are, as I mentioned, these soft shadows that are already built in. At the moment, we're not seeing those because everything is way, way too bright, and those colors are being clipped down by the exposure that we're using. So this daylight system does have a lot of features built into it. It's got a lot of functionality. The thing is, though, it can be a little bit tricky to actually get the colors and the intensities of your light set just the way you want. So if I were to take this light, this directional light, and if I needed to make it a little bit less intense by dropping this multiplier down, you'll notice it won't let me do that. I cannot come in and just simply adjust the intensity of this sunlight. Instead, this multiplier is actually tied into the exposure controls. So if I go back to the exposure controls and start to adjust this physical scale, as I begin altering this, you'll notice that the multiplier for this light changes. So this is where we need to come to adjust the overall intensity of this light. So what I like to do is, as I'm altering this daylight system, I use this logarithmic exposure, and then I'll do a render preview. Alright, so that way I can actually see some kind of a little indicator of what we're going to get. And so now I can come in and begin altering things like this physical scale. Now at the moment, you can start to see that we are now making a little bit of an impact on the overall scene. So let's maybe take this physical scale and start to raise this up. And just keep coming up with this until we kind of start to see some of the lighter colors becoming apparent in these shadows. And it's probably fairly difficult for you to see on this video, but if you're following along on your own system, you'll probably start to now see a little bit of a blue tint to some of these shadows. Alright, so let's take a look at what that's going to do for us. Alright, you can see how that just makes a huge impact on the overall render. So now we've really kind of compressed down the difference in the brightness and the darkness, or we've made that difference a little less apparent. And so now that dark color isn't getting clipped off quite so much by the exposure control, and so that lets a little bit more of this shadow color come through. So let's actually go back to this exposure control, and let's start to make some alterations to this. So let's begin by maybe taking some of this brightness down a little bit. Alright, we'll start to kind of darken this up a little bit more, and maybe start to bring this contrast up a little bit higher. Alright, so that way we can start to reintroduce a little bit more color into this, and maybe not leave it quite so washed out. And then we can always come in and start to dial some of these midtones up or down. Right, and I might actually take this physical scale and raise this up a little bit more. Right, again, just so we can start to keep from clipping off some of these really dark areas. Alright, so we'll try something like this, where we get a multiplier right around 3. Alright, so let's see what this does for us. Alright, so overall now we're starting to get much better. Little less darkness in these shadows, which is really kind of what we're going after. So again, we can just start to keep adjusting some of these different values. Now occasionally you might find yourself having to refresh this little preview window. Sometimes it needs to be kind of updated. There we go. especially as we start to adjust this physical scale, sometimes this little preview thumbnail will get a little bit out of whack, so you may need to maybe turn off this exterior daylight checkbox, turn it back on, then re-render this little preview. And then we'll start to get a little bit more accurate view of this. All right, so let's take a look at what we have now. Maybe just a little bit more brightness, just to pull out some of these different colors. All right, there we go. And now we can start to see we're getting now something much, much closer to what we'd expect to see with real sunlight. So if you still find that maybe your bright areas are still a little bit too bright, maybe you still got a little bit too much contrast, we could always start to come in and raise this physical scale up a little bit higher. All right, and by doing that, we can now start to drop this multiplier even further. All right. And again, once we start to adjust this physical scale, it might become necessary to re-render this little preview window. All right, we can come in, make our alterations to this as we see fit. So maybe adjust this brightness a little bit. Again, maybe start to increase some of this contrast. Find kind of the right values for us, and then re-render. All right, excellent. So that's a look at how we can utilize this daylight system within 3ds Max.